Hello. We are here with another episode of the Embracing Joy podcast. And I have a very, very special guest with us today, Dr. Christine Gibson. And I'll tell you a little bit about her. She's a family physician, she's a trauma therapist, and she's the author of the Modern Trauma Toolkit. And you can find her online on TikTok with the handle TikTok Trauma Doc. And she has over 130K followers there. She, along with her 2 TEDx talks. Dr. Gibson has a passion for health equity and systems change. She runs a company where she trains professionals on how to manage workplace psychological safety. It's called Safer Spaces Training and the Belong Foundation. It's such a pleasure to have you on, Dr. Gibson.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. And please call me Christy. I'm really not that formal.
Okay. All right, Christy. So, our topic today is workplace psychological safety and joy. A lot of high achieving professionals get into different workplaces that they may not have expected, and they may find that they're in a place that's not psychologically safe and they are losing some of their joy. So, this topic I think is so important. And you're an expert on that. So, I'm excited to delve into that with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't start off wanting to work in workplace mental health, but it's such a huge issue for folks because of how much time we spend in a work environment, especially physicians.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So we're going to start with a short game. It's called Convergence, where you say the first thing on, just to warm ourselves up, you'll say the first thing on your mind, and I say the first word on my mind, and then we see if we can connect the 2 words. So on the count of 3, we'll say the first thing, and then we'll see how the words connect. Ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3. River. What did you say?
I said sun.
Sun. Okay, so something that connects sun and river. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Outdoors. I think that counts.
That's good.
Yeah, nature and outdoors, it counts. Those are similar. So I think we definitely converged there. So yeah, it's just a fun game to kind of warm ourselves up to see if we can say the same word, which oftentimes we do, but that counts. Okay, so let's delve into our questions. So, in your work with the Safer Spaces training, how have you seen psychological safety or the lack thereof impact joy in the workplace, especially for high achieving professionals like physicians?
So, I mean, if I wanted to answer the question honestly, I would kind of speak to my personal experience because as physicians, we kind of follow this apprenticeship model where we're taught like this is the job. Everyone does it this way. And so I think it started quite early in residency where we just kind of follow the status quo without questioning, like, how is this harming me? It is such an honor to be a physician, and we work really hard to get there. So it's kind of hard for us to protect ourselves and say this isn't feeling comfortable, whether it's physical or psychological safety. And it's so intermingled. I mean, obviously the mind and body are connected, but I did hospitalist medicine for about 16 years in my first phase of my career. And through some of that, I did family medicine locums as well. So, I mean, the hours that I was working was bonkers. When I first started, I remember I would take 1 weekend off per month. So I'd get 2 days off and the rest I was working because I thought, well, I got to pay my loans off and, this is what we do. And all of a sudden I was in a work environment that was physically exhausting, like very little sleep, crazy hours. And then you start to ignore your body's interoceptive signals, which is what is the inside of my body telling my outside or telling my brain. So my body would tell me, oh,
Excuse me.
oh, you're hungry. Oh, you have to go to the bathroom. oh, you really need sleep, little one. And my brain learned to ignore those signals because I wasn't meeting them.
Mm-hmm.
So the disconnect between brain and body happened. And then, so that's the kind of the internal processes that were not very safe. And that psychological lack of safety is when you start to ignore your interoceptive signals. And
Mm-hmm.
interoception is how we feel emotions too. So if you're constantly pushing down emotions, like if you're feeling angry, which is often actually sad or fear, and you're pushing those down, lots of people have to do that, physicians included. So, I mean, one of the many things that was hard for me in that work environment was people would be very sick or they would even die.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have to finish that chart and move on to the next patient because I was being paid to see, one patient for 20 minutes and I couldn't stop to process the emotions I was feeling. So we learned to push them down. And I think a lot of folks aren't able to process emotions and they either get really amplified and large,
Mm-hmm.
which then creates a lack of psychological safety for everyone around them, or they
Mm-hmm.
suppress them, which is how we suppress those interoceptive signals. And so either way, the volume dial is the problem. The volume dial gets turned way, way down on those cues or way, way up. And a lot of that apprenticeship model or this is the work culture is what we kind of walk into. And we're nervous about like, well, I guess this is the job I signed up for. And we make waves or we try to pick our battles, but it ends up kind of chipping away for a long time. And this is especially true with people who have, intersectional identities. So you can walk into an environment with, and I don't believe in microaggressions. I feel all of it really adds up to traumatic content, whether it's racism or fat phobia or ageism. There are so many things that are in the cultural zeitgeist that we accommodate at our cost. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's kind of the broad strokes of what like systemically ends up happening and how it looks from the inside and the outside of the things that we can face.
Wow, and that can make a huge impact on like mental health, their physical health, like you said, because you're ignoring a lot of these emotions, you're ignoring your body's needs. You know, have you seen like that type of impact on physician on
Humans, yes, absolutely.
on all humans? Yes.
Humans in particular, like I think it's part of that burnout cycle that we run into.
Mhm.
And people will say, well, you can get a coach to learn how to do more effective charting or to learn how to set boundaries. And that is definitely part of it. So trying to, you know, change those external cues that are overwhelming. So when I think of trauma, which is the field that I've become an expert in,
Mhm.
it's roughly equivalent to toxic stress in terms of how it affects our physical body. And so my kind of niche take on this is not just the mental health side, but that mind body connection because I understand the physical side of it so much. And what ends up happening is our amygdalas start telling us that we're in danger
Mhm.
and change that mind body system quite significantly. So for a lot of us, we get stuck in a high sympathetic tone, which is fight and flight, and the overactive nervous system. So it's actively trying to get us out of that environment. So
Mhm.
fight and flight makes sense evolutionarily because humans could run away or fight off a lot of dangers that we used to face, and that's not true anymore. But flight in the work environment looks like an angry and irritable person, and
Mhm.
that would be a physician. So I can think of many times myself where I was angry and irritable for no good reason other than my sympathetic nervous system was telling me to get away from
Mhm.
my work environment, and that's kind of a catch-22. Flight can be like restlessness, and how that can show up is an inability to finish tasks and projects, taking on too many things, like just feeling like you're moving from one thing to the next. And that restlessness is how flight energy can show up. It can be really distracted. So a lot of folks are like kind of self-diagnosing ADHD. And my question is like, maybe, but could
Mhm.
it also be toxic stress.
Mm-hmm.
Your body has responded in fight and flight, and you just haven't gotten out of sympathetic tone for a really long time. And there are simple solutions to that. So if we just break that down to physiology again,
Mm-hmm.
one of the ways that we can release sympathetic tone is to exercise. So we hold a lot of that tone in our muscles. So when I was hospitalisting and kind of recognized that I was holding on to anxiety and restlessness, one of the best things that I did for my body is I worked out every single day. And it can seem insane when you're working 80, 100 hours a week to like
Mm-hmm.
put that time in, but
Mm-hmm.
that is what kind of helped my nervous system reach more balance. Simple things you can do on the job is drink small amounts of water, because that activates your GI tract, your gastrointestinal system, and that's parasympathetic. So if you just activate the parasympathetic system every 10, 20 minutes, you're reaching more homeostasis. So healthy snacks, sipping water. And I mean, that's way more common now than when I was working in that job. Like people will carry like a gallon of water around, but finding ways to activate that parasympathetic can also be simple breath work. So one thing that I would do now if I was still doing that job is I would notice, is my body in fight and flight? Am I like, do I have a wearable telling me that my heart rate's up or my blood pressure is going up? Because it did. I would do like 24-hour blood pressure monitor because I was starting to notice that it was not safe. And my blood pressure would be completely hijacked by that cortisol surge at the end of the morning. So if I was stuck in emerge doing admissions, I was awake for far too many hours, around 3, 4 in the morning, my blood pressure would be at like so high that I could have stroked.
Wow.
Imagine that I'd had a wearable at the time that I could tell, oh, your
Mm-hmm.
heart rate's starting to go up. Oh, your blood pressure's starting to go up. What are the physiologic means that I've got on hand that I can lower that response? So generally your exhale is your parasympathetic phase of the breathing process.
Mm-hmm.
So if I notice that my sympathetic tone is rising, then I would lengthen my exhale. And there's so many nice ways to do that. You can hum, you can sing along to a nice playlist, even just doing like a yoga breath. So
Mm-hmm.
like a breath, or like I call it bee breathing, but it's just your breath sounds like a bumblebee. That's a really nice way to exhale. And then it also vibrates your vagus nerve because you're moving your lung pleura up against it. So that would be a really easy thing to do, just to give yourself a reset for a minute. Now that I've learned a lot of psychosensory techniques, havening, tapping, tremoring, these are ways that my body naturally knows to restore that balance. And I would easily do that for like a minute or so between really tough patients. And now that I work in refugee health, that is absolutely what I do. If I have a difficult encounter with a person who's really sick, anything palliative, mental health, I'll give myself that reset so then when they come in the room, I can successfully co-regulate or show up with my own nervous system being calm, which is such a good thing to learn when you're in a profession that is public facing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing about that is when your sympathetic nervous system has been in overdrive for so long, it actually tips into an overactive parasympathetic state. And we call this freeze collapse. And so hints around that might be trouble getting out of bed, trouble getting your list of things to do done, feeling really slow and lethargic and low energy. And of course, when you're sleep deprived, that could be the explanation, but it can also be a nervous system thing. So starting to get to know, what does my nervous system look like when it's in fight and flight? What does my nervous system look like when it's in freeze collapse? How does that show up physically? Like, what are the cues that my body is telling me, and learn to rediscover those interoceptive cues? And then what does it look like for me in my relationships, in my work environment? And how do I show up when I'm in those states?
Wow. Yeah, you really dropped a lot of gems there that are very important to think about, and I think the wearables is also helpful too, because sometimes we don't realize ourselves, that we're in that state because you've suppressed it for so long. So, wow. And then you provided a lot of tips that are helpful, I think, to everyone that's listening to this. With that being said, So not just, in the physician place, but just for general workplace, what are some common traumas that workplaces unintentionally perpetuate? And how can leaders begin to shift their culture to create safer environments?
I love that you use the word safer, Mukta, because like being perfectly safe is never possible. And so
Mhm.
much of what happens when you've done something wrong is to repair it properly. So that's one major thing, is to really get good at apologizing, being vulnerable, modeling humility, and not just highlighting mistakes and errors, but repairing those and
Mhm.
like using them as collective learning agreements rather than saying, well, this person's terrible. So when they measure psychological safety, Amy Edmondson's done a lot of research on that. And vulnerability and humility and leadership is actually one of the main things that creates a psychologically safe environment. So, what does it look like for us to own our own mistakes and to do what in therapy we call rift and repair? So, not just gloss over, like, oh, yeah, I was really showing up angry and irritable yesterday, but I'm just going to hope nobody noticed, versus showing up and saying, hey, look, I recognize that I was really snappy. I'm so sorry. I'm going to work harder at not bringing that energy to work. And I'm going to do that by looking after myself in these ways. And then, even like, could we as a team learn our own strategies on how we're doing it and not hold it in and saying, oh, I'm the only one facing it? Because chances are you're not. A lot of people are feeling stress and anxiety and a lot of those physical cues, and they don't necessarily know what to do. So if somebody shows up and says, hey, like, I've learned this beautiful way of self-soothing, it's called havening techniques. And this is one of the things I think blew up on my TikTok, is because I showed a lot of really basic skills that you can do very quickly. So havening would just be a gentle petting of your palm of your hand, your upper shoulder, across the face, and it just
Mhm.
really calms the body down quickly. So if you do this along with breath work or guided imagery, it's a nice way to create delta and theta waves in the brain, which is very, very calming. And that's what the research showed, is those body movements, which also includes moving your eyes from side to side. So some of the therapies that I've studied has those eye movements, which is what we call bilateral stimulation, or moving both sides of the body. And those eye movements were also proven to cause delta and theta waves, or more calming brain waves, compared to agitated gamma waves. So there are lots of different ways that we can take the body's physiology and make it work for us. And imagine if people were sharing those strategies in the work environment and created a safer space to do that.
Mhm.
I think the other major thing that can happen is those isms that I mentioned, the racism, the classism, the ageism. Definitely in lots of environments right now, LGBTQ folks are feeling very afraid. Anyone who's racialized is at risk in their
Mhm.
work, home, and school environments. So creating safety around that, cultural appreciation, making sure that there's overt signals within the work environment that you are creating a safer space for folks, and then showing up to say, this is not just a sign on the window, this is something that I actively do. I think that's really crucial at this time, because there's a lot of folks that are deliberately harming folks with those intersectional identities, and anywhere that they can feel safer is important,
Mhm.
especially if you're a public facing organization and you're working with people, helping them know that we're trying our best to be a safe environment here is definitely helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. So incorporating, those acknowledging first, of course, that when there is harm and working to do better, and showing techniques like through the workplace, such as what did you call it? Harmony?
Havening. So I
Haven.
think that the word haven is kind of like a safe space. So
Okay.
yeah, that's one of the many psychosensory techniques that I've studied. But what I was really
Mhm.
curious about, like, so much of toxic stress shows up in your nervous system. What are all the
Mhm.
ways that our body already knows to self-soothe? And it turns
Mhm.
out there's tons of, evidence-based ways that we can self-soothe. So I will teach my patients things like tapping or self acupressure, and they can just tap in the work environment. And I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like this volume dial that either gets turned up too high or down too low. And something like tapping can get that volume dial into the right range where you can still experience your emotions, but they just don't feel really intense. And so it's that amplification that our amygdalas does and keeps saying like, hey, do you know you're in emotional danger? Hey.
Mm-hmm.
And it just turns the volume up because we're not paying attention. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes paying attention and saying, hey, yeah, like I'm hearing that.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I'm going to do to help my nervous system. And sometimes that acknowledgement, even to self, is really, really helpful.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. So, like I said, so we already talked a little bit about someone who's not feeling psychologically safe at home. That there's what's the small practice that they can begin today? We talked a little bit about different practices, but what would be the one key mindset shift or one of those practices that you would suggest for them to do while they wait for their environment to change?
You mentioned not feeling psychologically safe at home. And I think that, that opens up.
I said at home. Okay.
Yeah, you said at home in that question.
Oh, okay. I meant at work. I meant at work. I meant
Okay.
at work. Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, feeling not psychologically safe at work.
So there's a couple of things. You've got to look at it from multiple different levels. So there's the individual things of what's possible for me to change within myself and my mind body system.
Mm-hmm.
There's also kind of the ecosystem, right? So waiting for things to change doesn't always happen. So sometimes we need to feel empowered to draw those boundaries, to model safer behaviors. So within ourselves, the things that we can do are, so we've talked a little bit about those physical shifts that can change the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
The mental shifts are definitely also possible, but when your amygdalas are really, really firing, we don't actually have access to our cognitive brain. So the first step is helping with the nervous system strategies and the physical calming. When that's happened and the amygdalas are not firing so much, we can then access cognition again. So one of the things a lot of folks notice when they're in toxic stress environments is that they have troubles with memory and concentration. And as physicians, we're always taught cognitive strategies work for everything. And
Mm-hmm.
reasons why they might not is when you're in toxic overload, your amygdalas are just too busy and you have to do nervous system strategies first. So I'll preface it with that because it's very counterintuitive to a lot of us that learn like
Mm-hmm.
CBT fixes everything. So once you have access to that prefrontal cortex and your cortex again, we can adjust the mindset. So a lot of folks, when you're feeling a lack of psychological safety, you feel like the world isn't safe. And so what we try to do is to amplify the moments of safety. So cues where you're getting support, acknowledgement, encouragement, engagement, and connection, we try to amplify those moments. So our brain is naturally cued to notice danger signals.
Mm-hmm.
This is happening at about, sorry, that's, I'm just realizing I have this like plant system that turns the water on and it sounds like a waterfall. So in case you heard a waterfall, our brains are designed to notice at a 5-to-1 ratio signs of danger because one of the jobs of our brains is to protect ourselves. So what we actually have to do is deliberately and consciously amplify cues of safety. So noticing really basic stuff. So I could hear a bird out my window today, or that even just that sunbeam coming in is feeling really nice, and I'm just kind of watching it move across my desk. I have a plant on my desk. Those nature cues can be really, really beneficial for our nervous system. Can I surround myself with photos or even just have my screensaver of something that really makes me feel good? Somebody complimented me at work about what I'm doing or the skirt that I was wearing. I'm just going to like bask in that and really notice that today. So trying to amplify cues of safety deliberately can be really helpful for that sense that my external environment isn't safe.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that a lot of us carry related to childhood wounding, like developmental wounds, is the sense of not being good enough. And that's something that's constantly amplified in the work environment. And I'll say specifically for physicians, we can't save everybody. We can't fix every illness. The human body dies. So we will never feel good enough at work because we're constantly faced with the limitations of the human body. And so part of feeling good enough is one of the TikToks that I did that really blew up is something called affirmations. And we use this instead of affirmations because affirmations can sometimes feel like we're gaslighting ourselves. So if I was to say, I am good enough, I'm great at my job, I'm such a good doctor, like, does that feel true? But imagine putting a what if in front of it. What if I could be good enough? What if on some days I'm a really good doctor? What if I'm doing the best that I can? So the words what if just really softens it and it plants this possibility. So affirmations can sometimes feel like it's such a big leap from where you actually are, which for a lot of us is this feeling of inadequacy and shame and not good enough. And that doesn't have to be true all the time, but it's often true for many of us, some of them. So just those affirmations, instead of, oh, what if I suck? What if I'm going to bomb this tomorrow? What if I'm good enough? What if I'm going to figure this out? What if I'm going to show up the best I can? And those are just really gentle seeds to plant in the brain. So the opposite of being stuck in those trauma responses that I talked about early, which is fight, flight, freeze, is having mental flexibility. So we're trying to increase our capacity for flexibility. And these are techniques that we can learn.
Wow, those are some great, great techniques. And this was such a great discussion about workplace safety and things that we can start today to feel more psychologically safe. So, with that being said, we're on our wrap-up questions. So, Christy, who is a model for joy in your life and why?
It's funny because the first thing that comes to my mind is my dog.
Oh, that's a good one.
I mean, he lives in the moment. And I think humans are so, because our cognitive capacity is so massive, we will get stuck ruminating about the past or worrying about the future. And my dog is just really happy in the moment. If he has something great to smell, he's overjoyed. That's just the greatest thing. So every walk is like a fresh start. Getting a treat, wow, best day ever. Me, like he just couldn't be happier. You can just see like a soft smile, rolls over onto his belly, feels vulnerable, feels safe, feels soft. You know, the times where I feel like I can roll onto my belly and, you know, have someone scratch it or like just be really engaged in nature, that is when I feel the most joy.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. If you were baking a theoretical cake of joy, what would you say the top 3 ingredients are?
I mean, for me, it's super personal. We spoke before we started recording that I'm obsessed with learning. So for me, it would be like learning or rating. So like just using my brain in that way where I'm engaged. And sometimes learning for me is travel. So just being a part of like this ability to constantly grow. So let's say that would be yeast because that's the thing that helps the cake grow.
Okay.
Because it's going to expand. So expansion. And then there's like foundational needs, right? So interesting, Maslow's hierarchy of needs was stolen from the Blackfoot people in Siksika, like a First Nations community here in Canada. And so when they talk about foundational needs being like water and air and shelter, which for lots of folks is at risk, there's like connection and engagement. And at the top was self-actualization, according to Maslow. That self-actualization was actually foundational for First Nations folks. And so all of those needs, I think, are foundational. And so I'll put that in the cake as, well, for me, it's going to be a gluten-free flour because I'm silly.
Okay.
So getting my little needs met. And then I'm going to put some icing on it, not because I need something sweet, but we're baking the cake of joy. So that's like remembering. For me, it's about the balance. So like as much as those foundational needs matter and the learning and expansion matters, like One of my favorite TikTok memes right now is I almost forgot this was the point. And you're just doing something really amazing, whether it's traveling or being in nature. I just came back from the lake cottage where I was kayaking with my dog.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see myself doing that meme. I almost forgot this was the point. So
Mm-hmm.
that for me is the icing on the cake, is just remembering to like savor the sweetness of those little micro connections you can make with your own body, with music, with pets, with spirituality, whatever it is that you need for your sweetness.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That sounds like a delicious and very nutritious cake. So, where can our audience find you if they wanted to reach out to you? What would be the best contact?
There's two different places to learn more about me. So all of the skills that I mentioned are in my book, The Modern Trauma Toolkit. And I really wanted this book to be super practical. So one of the reasons that I gave you so many practical tidbits is because that's my goal isn't to just tell you what's the problem. My goal is to give you solutions and for you to build your personal toolkit around that. So moderntrauma.com gives you all the buying options to connect with me. I don't take on patients, but I'm happy to do speaking engagements and to talk about safer spaces training and the kind of work that we're doing. ChristineGibson.net is my website.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wonderful. So, this was such a pleasure. Please make sure that you share this episode with a friend and also follow Dr. Gibson on her website and check out the book for more details. Thank you very much. Bye.
Oh, thank you.